Hello everyone, today I'll be talking to you about divorce. My name is Zion Benumi, and now I want to talk about the fact that people say divorce is a sin. So I'm going to talk about that, and I'm mostly very particular about the fact that I use scripture to interpret scripture. Okay, so that it's not like it's my head knowledge or it is someone's experience or someone's wise saying or something like that. Okay, and I find it very wise to do that because, well, it's only the writer of a book that should be able to explain what he meant in the book, right? Not somebody else, and especially not somebody else that have lived like how many thousands of years after the scripture was written, right? Okay, so scripture interprets scripture. So let's go right into the word. Okay, so people say divorce is a sin. So first of all, I'm going to address that. Okay, divorce is not a sin. And how did I know that? Because if divorce is a sin, well, God has sinned. It means God has sinned. Why did I say so? I know this is the fault. In fact, people actually think that the statement divorce is a sin is actually exist or occur in the Bible. No, there's no scripture like that, or at least I've not found any scripture like that. Let me put it like that. So if anybody that believes that divorce is a sin is a scripture, please, I would like to see that scripture and I would like to analyze it. Okay, so divorce is not a sin, and that scripture statement does not exist in the Bible. And how did I know that if divorce is a sin, then God has sinned? Because if you look at Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 1 to 8, I will not be looking at it. I'm not be reading it because of time. So, but please look at it yourself. Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 8, especially verse 8, you see how it is that God divorced the children of Israel. He divorced Israel on account of adultery and all of that. And if you also look at Isaiah chapter 50 verse 1, you see the same thing. God divorced Israel. Okay, so why am I talking about this? You see, uh, um, if God divorced Israel, then it means that divorce is not a sin. Unless, of course, you want to believe that God sins or God is a sinner, which we know that it's not true, right? God is not a sinner. God does not sin. The Bible says he knew no sin. He did no sin, right? Okay, so we know that divorce is not a sin because God divorced the children of Israel. Okay, so by the way, yes, at the time the relationship the children of Israel and God had was a marital relationship. That's why you remember the book of Hosea. God directed Hosea to marry a prostitute, right? Just so that he can demonstrate how the children of Israel are, let me say, are behaving, okay, in the relationship that they had together. So he used the marital relationship to use it as an analogy to explain the relationship he has with that of the children of Israel. Okay, so that's it. And even today, we still have the same relationship with Christ, right? The Bible says we the saints are the bride of Christ. Okay, so we find that in the book of Revelation and some other books. Okay, so that's the relationship. So if God can actually divorce, then who are we not to divorce? Okay, so I'm not saying everybody should just go ahead with any little thing in marriage that they should go about divorcing. No, that's not it. Okay, so then another scripture I want to give you is the scripture of Ezra chapter 10 verse 3 to 19 to support the fact that divorce is not a sin. So in Ezra chapter 10, what happened was that the children of Israel actually sinned. How did they sin? They went to marry, they took wives from people that God said not to take wives from. So they married pagan wives, okay, that would probably lead them into adultery and all of that. So they took pagan wives and finally they repented. And while they repented, they said that they eventually, in order to, like, let me use the word restitute, in order to restitute, that they will divorce their wives. They'll put their wives away. Okay, so, and in fact they said they'll put their wives away and they'll put their children away. So you see how it is that divorce was put in a good light in this scripture. And you see how it is that you cannot use sin to restitute sin, right? You cannot, like, say you want to correct something and use an error to correct an error. It doesn't happen like that. Sin cannot correct sin. So if they used sin as a way of restitution, if they used divorce as a way of restitution, then obviously divorce is not a sin. Okay, so that's that. So that's me explaining that divorce is not a sin. Now there are so many other scriptures in the Bible that talked about divorce or not going into not getting divorced and all that. I'm going to be analyzing each and every scripture in number of parts of these videos I'll be making. Okay, so if something else I wanted to say is that, you see, when it comes to human beings, first of all, we need to understand that divorce will be almost inevitable. Why? Because if the perfect being, that is God, had to divorce the children of Israel, well, what I mean, like, God is married and then he gets divorced. Like, what are the chances? We should actually sit down and look at that. So then, what are the chances of we not divorcing? Okay, we are like this. We are human beings like this. Okay, the heart of man is very wicked, and then you now say there will not be divorce. Okay, so it will not add up. Okay, by the way, uh, the reason why we probably are not having that divorce occurring, like in the numbers that we ought to have been seeing, considering that God divorced, is because now we have the Spirit of Christ in us. Okay, so but in light of these three scriptures that I've given right now, you see how it is that divorce is not a sin, especially first of all on account of on the ground of sexual immorality, adultery. Okay, it's obviously divorce is not a sin, and Jesus Christ corroborates that if in Matthew chapter 19 or chapter 5, he said you can divorce only on the grounds of sexual immorality. Okay, so but that scripture, I'm still going to go to that scripture. I'm still going to elaborate more on that scripture. But for now, let's just say that it corroborates the fact that God too had to divorce on account of adultery as well. Okay, so that's the first thing we learn. Well, the second thing we learn with this scripture, the scripture of Ezra now, Ezra chapter 10, verse 3 to 19, where they had to use divorce to restitute, is the fact that you see how it is that they married pagan wives, meaning it's like saying in the New Testament where we have been unequally yoked together with an unbeliever, right? Okay, so when you are married to a pagan, it's as good as saying you are unequally yoked with an unbeliever, and because of that, obviously from here you see that is another condition that you can use to say that to give as a reason to actually divorce. Okay, so that's a reason to actually divorce from this, and you see that First Corinthians chapter 7 will corroborate this, because he actually said it too, that if you are married to an unbeliever, although he also gave an exception, that if you are married to an unbeliever, if unbeliever is willing to stay with you, then you should not divorce him. If not, you should divorce him. Okay, so I'm still coming back to that scripture, and I'm going to talk more in details with that scripture. Okay, so divorce is almost inevitable because we humans will make mistakes. You see, the way it has been preached many times, you see how it is that churches or pastors don't give you the scriptural formula, and I'm emphasizing scriptural now. Okay, they don't give you scriptural formula to get married, how to get married. They don't give. This is why right from how many years ago people have been preaching, and yet people are still getting it wrong in marriage. For as long as the scripture that they are teaching, for as long as what they are teaching is not from the scripture, people will always get it wrong. Okay, so there's that. So there's this lack of knowledge that is not making marriage work all this while. Another reason why marriages fail is because hypocrites. There are so many hypocrites. There are so many wolves in sheep clothing that we have in churches today. Okay, so not everybody that attend church, not everybody that go to church is actually a Christian, right? And you see how a lot of people are so religious. Okay, they to put on the sheep clothing, and that's enough to deceive somebody else, that is to deceive somebody to get married to them. And when they now get into the marriage, and they see that okay, the sheep clothing is off, now they begin to see the wolves, and you want them to still continue staying with the wolves. No, from this scripture of Ezra and that of First Corinthians chapter 7, you see how it is that you should actually exit. Okay, that is a reason to exit. So divorce is almost inevitable. Now I'm going to talk about the scripture that Jesus said not to divorce, where he said that you should not be. I'm going to talk about that scripture, Matthew chapter 19 and Matthew chapter 5, and I'm going to be talking about it together with First Corinthians chapter 7, where Paul said give those conditions. Okay, because those two scriptures kind of are contradicting, so I'm going to reconcile the scriptures right now. So that will be in my next video.